Daisy May Tallman. On November 26, 2008, the skeletal remains of an unidentified woman were discovered west of White Swan in Yakima County, Washington. The Yakima National Tribal Police and the Yakima County Coroner's Office launched an investigation, following every lead they could. Although forensic DNA testing was conducted, the remains did not provide a viable DNA profile. With no identification and all leads exhausted, the case went cold. The woman remained unidentified, earning her the name Yakima County Jane Doe. Then, in 2022, when DNA technology was a lot more advanced, the Yakima County Coroner's Office teamed with Othram to leverage advanced DNA testing to identify the unknown woman. Othram is a Texas-based laboratory. The skeletal remains of the Yakima County Jane Doe were sent to Othram, and their scientists were able to produce a usable DNA extract. Funding for Othram's DNA testing work was provided by the Washington State Attorney General's Office. The lab used forensic-grade genome sequencing to develop a comprehensive DNA profile. Through an investigation by the Yakima County Coroner's Office, a familial reference DNA sample was provided, and Othram used familial testing to confirm the suspected relationship between the reference sample and the DNA profile of the unknown woman. This whole process finally led to the Yakima County Coroner's Office being able to announce that the Jane Doe is Daisy May Tallman on January 4, 2023. She was born on January 10, 1958. Daisy was staying with family in the White Swan area of the Yakima Indian Reservation at the time of her disappearance. Her keys and backpack were later found in the closed area of the reservation, known as Soda Springs. Daisy was a citizen of the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakima Nation. Daisy was last seen on August 30th and was reported missing on October 29, 1987. She would have been 29 years old at the time she went missing. The Yakima County Coroner's Office offered their condolences to the family and friends of Daisy. Investigators are still trying to find out what happened after she disappeared that led to her body being found. Daisy's name is listed alongside 16 other Indigenous women who were found dead or reported missing from the Yakima Reservation between 1980 and 1992. Before we continue, we want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch our videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy our content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Moving on to the next case. Daniel Garza Gonzalez. On March 13, 1973, fishermen discovered the lifeless body of a man floating in the Saginaw River near Zilwaukee, Michigan. An autopsy revealed he had been shot 7 times and suffered blunt force trauma to the back of his head. The medical examiner believed he had been attacked, shot, and dumped into the river about 6 weeks before he was found. With no leads to follow, detectives buried the man in a grave marked John Doe within a year. The case went cold until 2020, when Michigan State Police's Cold Case Team and Missing Persons Unit reopened the investigation. They exhumed the body for advanced DNA testing and sent the remains to the Michigan State University Department of Anthropology for re-examination. In late 2021, with help from the nonprofit DNA Doe Project, Inc., previously obtained hair samples and a new bone sample from the John Doe were sent to Santa Cruz, California-based Estrella Forensics for forensic genetic genealogy. In 2022, a possible familial match was located with collaboration from the DNA Doe Project. The connection linked the unidentified remains to a family in Beeville, Texas. With the assistance of the Texas Rangers, the family was informed of the possible identification, and investigators obtained familial DNA reference samples from several family members that were sent to the FBI DNA lab for comparison. The FBI confirmed that the remains were those of Daniel G. Garza Gonzalez. He was 28 years old when his life was taken. The identification was announced on January 5, 2023. Daniel was a Vietnam War veteran who was wounded during the conflict. After returning to America, he left Fort Worth, Texas, hoping to find work in Flint, Michigan. His family never heard from him again. Forensic genealogist Corrine Binder, team leader of the DNA Doe Project, shared this. "We are grateful that when our research hit a dead end, some of Daniel's cousins came forward and submitted their DNA, uploading it to GEDmatch to aid our team in identifying him. We are committed to putting in as many hours as necessary until this case is solved." Anyone with information regarding Daniel's murder is urged to contact Michigan State Police Detective Sergeant Bill Arndt at 989-615-6257. Moving on to the next case. David Cox. A group of 5 young guys playing football was spotted by 18-year-old David Cox, his sister Carrie Ann, 17, and her boyfriend, 19-year-old Nathan McGuigan, when they were out strolling on the evening of Monday, June 1, 2009. David, who is regarded by his family as a sweet child, had dyspraxia and autism, even though he was a legal adult. His mental age was roughly 8 years old. David was struggling with himself because he was frustrated, according to what his father remembered. His family had previously relocated from Leicester to Doncaster in order to get away from bullies who were pursuing the 18-year-old. David requested whether he may play football with the bunch of young men since he wanted to join in too, but the men refused to pass the ball to him. After that, there was a fierce dispute that started. Witnesses in a nearby pizzeria reported hearing curses and angry voices. David was called a freak and a strange by the young males. Gasmere Hogser, a pizza restaurant employee, then requested that they all depart. Later on, he would report to the police that David was merely yelling and approaching them. It was merely spoken. "Just pass me the ball," he murmured as he stood up. The 18-year-old started to advance near the group, throwing air punches as he became enraged that no one would kick over the football. At the coroner's inquest, one of the young men, Max Evans, subsequently testified that he had gone to defend his mate, with whom David was becoming close. Although he acknowledged he had struck David, he described the blow as being as light as a tap on the jaw. Carl Reed, a different group member, cried out that David had struck him. David was struck by Carl as Gasmere tried to break the two apart. Carl remembered that when I flicked my arm out at the inquest, I hit David in the jaw. If anything, it was a jab. David took 2 hits before collapsing face first onto the sidewalk. The group of young men who had hit the 18-year-old claimed that he had tripped. Upon seeing the fall, Gasmere, the pizza business employee, said he hit the floor hard. It was a painful tumble. He had his back to the concrete. Then he stood back up. He was unconscious the last time he fell on the back of his head. David died on June 3rd after being kept on life support for 2 days. 3 guys, aged 18 and 19, were detained after he passed away on suspicion of assault. The police then launched a manslaughter investigation. But in an odd turn of events, the CPS chose to withdraw all of the accusations against them, claiming that they had acted in self-defense. October 2010 saw the start of an inquest, but it was postponed after the coroner requested that CPS reevaluate filing charges. Since they said no, the inquest was sent back to coroner Nicola Mundy to be finished. Mundy chastised the group of young men severely, saying that conflicting accounts of what happened had made her job harder. She also said that several of the witnesses seemed to be less than honest and called them self-serving. Mundy came to the conclusion that David had died from the second strike he had taken, noting that the fatal blow had been struck hard enough to bruise deep tissue. David had passed out from the hit. Traumatic-related bleeding was listed as the official cause of death. Friends and relatives of David are startled, grieved, and left without closure by the lack of charges in his case. His mother said, "I believe the police ought to look into this again. For me, the past 2 years have been terrible. No resolution has been reached." Moving on to the next case. Dorothy Ricker. Officers from the Michigan State Police were called to a location near Fox Farm Road in Mystique County on October 27, 1997, in response to a report of an apparent beached woman who was dead and naked. Other than one earring, there was nothing at the time to identify the woman. The woman drowned and seemed to have been an accident according to the autopsy, which concluded she was no longer alive. Detectives from Cadillac Post, the Michigan State Police, and the department's Missing People Coordination Team re-examined the case in September 2020 and excavated the woman in order to do sophisticated DNA testing. For forensic genetic genealogy, bone samples were sent to Estrella Forensics as part of the DNA Doe project. In July of 2021, a possible familial match was located. The names were supplied from the DNA Doe project to the Michigan State Police for vetting. The DNA Doe project uses investigative genetic genealogy, which results in the generation of leads to identify the deceased. The possible connection linked the remains to the Ting family in action, Maine. Familial DNA reference samples from a possible brother were then obtained. Finally, the Michigan State Police announced on January 9, 2023, that the Jane Doe is 26-year-old Dorothy Lynn Thing Ricker. Dorothy was last seen in Wisconsin on October 2, 1997 at 12:30 p.m. by officers with the St. Francis Police Department. When contacted by officers, Dorothy had not yet been reported as missing, and nothing appeared abnormal. The following day, an abandoned vehicle was found nearby, and its license plate came back to a missing/endangered person, entered by the Chicago Police Department. Investigators are currently trying to determine whether Dorothy's drowning was accidental, whether she took her own life, or if foul play is involved. Moving on to the next case. Elsie Marie Baker. An old woman's bones were found buried in a small grave in a rural region close to Grants Pass on June 19, 1986. A used pair of dentures, fabric, and the rubber stoppers from a mobility walker were discovered next to the skeleton. The grave's location had always had a dip in the ground, according to the property owner at the time, who had purchased it 12 years earlier. After the evidence was brought to the Oregon State Medical Examiner's office, it was discovered that the deceased woman was between 62 and 63 years old and had passed away between 15 and 25 years prior to the cemetery being discovered. After several years of investigation, the Josephine County Sheriff's Office was unable to uncover any solid leads in the case. The dentures were investigated in an attempt to identify via dental records, but this also did not lead to anything meaningful for investigators. From 1986 to 2015, over 29 years, the case was regularly visited and reworked, but nothing resulted in a lead. Finally, in 2016, genetic genealogy began to come into play. A bone sample was sent to the University of North Texas Center for Human Identification for processing and uploading into the National DNA Database, CODIS. However, the sample was said to be too degraded with bacteria to be successfully processed. In 2018, another attempt was made. This time, a partial DNA profile was successfully entered into CODIS. The profile was checked weekly for matches, but no genetic associations were found. Another sample was submitted, and in October of 2020, a DNA profile was successfully made and analyzed. The profile was able to provide a phenotype report. The unknown woman had very fair skin, hazel eyes, and brown to dark blonde hair. The report also graded the case with a very high solvability rating given the circumstances, evidence, and researchers available. The ball was now rolling, and the genetic profile in the database began receiving all sorts of dings, matches with genetically close relatives to the woman. Investigators began putting together a profile rooted in genetic genealogy, an extensive and well-documented family history with genetic links to 4 distinct family lines, leading to a family of 9 children raised in Nez Perce, Idaho. 6 daughters belonged to this family, and 5 daughters all had documentation and record of when and how they passed away. 1 daughter did not have any of these records. Elsie Marie Baker, born May 6 of 1896. Elsie and her husband Frank moved from Idaho to Jackson, Oregon by 1950 and are confirmed to have lived in Rogue River, Precinct 77. Frank filed for divorce from Elsie in May of 1955, and it was granted in June of 1956. Frank passed away 2 years later in 1958. Elsie disappeared at some point after May of 1955, and public family trees reported Elsie passing in Grants Pass, Oregon, around 1955. However, Elsie was documented as receiving treatment for cancer on June 13, 1959, at the Josephine General Hospital. Investigators concluded Elsie had passed away under potentially suspicious circumstances sometime after 1959. Elsie's only child had 9 children of her own, and it was these grandchildren that finally tied the case together. One of the grandchildren had an extensive family tree online and agreed to an oral swab for testing. The results were definitive. It was confirmed that it was Elsie Marie Baker's remains that were found. Dr. Nikki Vance, Human Identification Program Coordinator, said the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office is honored and humbled to have worked with Josephine County Sheriff's Office in Parabon Nano Labs to resolve this decades-old mystery. At this time, nothing is known about how she came to be buried in a remote corner of the property. However, Elsie has her name, and her family has the answers thanks to the scientific method and the hard work of the investigators. Moving on to the next case. Ivan and Anisha Fowler. On June 20, 2016, authorities arrived at the home of Patricia Fowler, a 47-year-old mother of twins, Ivan and Anisha, on Byron Street in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Acting on instructions from the county's Department of Children, Youth, and Families, CYF, law enforcement was there to remove all of Patricia's children from her custody. She was under investigation for medical neglect involving 4 of her children, all of whom had serious health conditions and had collectively missed nearly 72 appointments with doctors and specialists. While authorities removed all 4 children from the home, they were soon notified by the CYF that Patricia had 6 children in her care. The missing children, Ivan and Anisha, both of whom would have been 17 at the time, were never located. This ordeal was not Patricia's first time dealing with the CYF. On November 8, 2000, when Ivan was just 2, 46% of his body was severely burned. His mother claimed his older brother had accidentally scolded him in the bath. She didn't call an ambulance for Ivan until the following day, and he was hospitalized until December 13th. Following this, both Ivan and Anisha were taken from Patricia's care but were returned within a few days. CYF failed to notify the police of the incidents, but continued to maintain contact with the mother of 6. Details and circumstances around the children's disappearances are hazy at best. Their date of disappearance is listed as 11th, 2006, at which time they would have been 7 years old. However, their family members have not seen Ivan or Anisha since 2002 or 2003. Furthermore, 2 separate landlords who rented to Patricia between 2006 and 2015 never met Ivan or Anisha, believing they had never lived with her at all. Patricia, for her part, has not been forthcoming about the children's whereabouts, giving various accounts of their location, including that they were with friends or family, and that they were in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, depending on which version of events she was telling. Eventually, Patricia stated she had sold the children to a woman named Barbara for $2,000 each, but she later retracted this claim when she was told it was illegal to sell a child. Then, in one particular interview with a Pittsburgh TV station, Patricia claimed that her friend, a woman supposedly called Cheryl Willis, had stepped in and helped and taken both Ivan and Anisha to North Carolina approximately 10 years back. She added that when the pair were 13, they moved to Georgia with Cheryl Willis. It is unclear if this woman's existence was ever. In August 2016, numerous charges were laid against Patricia, including endangering the welfare of children and concealing the whereabouts of children. Around this same time, her son, Datwan Fowler, who was 18, was charged with imitation and criminal conspiracy among other things after. He admitted to police that he had pretended to be Ivan so he could message the police and claimed that he and Anisha were in Atlanta, Georgia. He said he did this so the authorities would leave him and his mother alone. In May of 2017, a judge threw out most of the charges against Patricia so that only 3 remained. These included endangering the welfare of a child, unsworn falsification, and public assistance false statements. The judge claimed there was insufficient evidence that she had harmed the twins or concealed their whereabouts from their father. Patricia pleaded guilty to the remaining charges and was sentenced to 4 years of probation. Additionally, she was ordered to pay $57,000 in restitution. This money was public assistance payments she had received for the twins despite them no longer being in her care. As part of her plea agreement, the charges against her 18-year-old son were dropped. To this day, the whereabouts of Anisha and Ivan are still unknown. Neither child has been enrolled in school in Pennsylvania or other states. 2 of their siblings, including Datwan, recall that they vanished after being sick. Datwan claimed Ivan was sick one day, and when he awoke the next morning, Ivan was missing. Anisha disappeared shortly after. However, both Patricia and this individual insist that all the children are still alive. Ivan and Anisha are described as African American, with black hair and brown eyes. Ivan likely bears scars on 46% of his body, including his hands and face, from burns he suffered at the age of 2. If you have any information about their disappearance, please contact the Penn Hills Police Department at 412-9798 2011. Moving on to the next case. James Wayne Ingersoll. A 39-year-old victim claimed in June 1994 to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department in North Carolina that she had been assaulted at knife point by an unidentified guy who had broken into her home. Although male DNA was taken from her body and examined, the assailant could not be identified at the time because of limitations in DNA technology. In 2018, more examination of the material was carried out. The 2010 attack in Columbia, South Carolina, was connected to the forensic samples from the scene in 2019. 2022. To identify a person of interest, detectives used forensic genetic genealogy. Forensic evidence was then sent to Othram. Othram scientists used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive genealogical profile for the unknown man. Their in-house genealogy team used a genetic genealogy search to produce investigative leads that were returned to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. Investigators continued working the case, and their follow-up investigative efforts led to the collection of a DNA sample from a person of interest. The DNA profile for this person of interest matched the DNA profiles for the unknown subject that were recovered from the 1994 2010 assaults. As a result of years of extensive forensic testing and evidence examination, the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's Crime Lab and Cold Case Unit identified the suspect as James Wayne Ingersoll. He was born on November 6, 1972. In May 2023, members of the police department's Violent Criminal Apprehension Team located and apprehended Ingersoll in Concord, North Carolina. South Carolina Law Enforcement Division and the Columbia Police Department also assisted. The victims have been notified of the arrest. This case is still being looked at and is currently active. The Public Affairs Office of the CMPD will provide any new information when it becomes available. We are asking anyone with information regarding this event to contact 704-432-TIPS so they can talk to a detective directly. By calling 704-334-1600, the public can also anonymously provide information to Crime Stoppers. The goal of the investigation is to determine whether James Wayne Ingersoll is connected to any other crimes. Moving on to the next case. J.B. Beasley and Tracy Holla. two vibrant 17-year-olds from Dothan, Alabama, J.B. Beasley and Tracy Howlet, had a close connection and lofty goals that were tragically cut short on the dreadful summer night of July 31, 1999. Her name, J.B. Hilton Green Beasley, was a combination of her father, Hilton Lanier Beasley, and his friend, J.B. Green. She was born in the summer of 1982. Early on, J.B. was described as a vibrant and boisterous youngster who was not hesitant to engage and socialize with others. J.B. changed into a smart and attractive young lady as she approached puberty. In addition to being a talented dancer who hoped to earn a college dance scholarship, she was also a popular student at Northview High School in Dothan and had aspirations of becoming a pediatrician. Despite facing challenges, including a temporary falling out with her mother and a custody dispute, J.B. navigated her teenage years with resilience. Tracy Jean Howlet was the oldest child in her family. Known for her caring nature, Tracy earned the nickname Dee Dee for often serving as the designated driver for her friends. Academically exceptional, she was a majorette at Northview High School, consistently making the presidential honor roll. Since the age of 3, Tracy harbored a steadfast dream of becoming a doctor, and she and a friend had already applied to Florida State University. Both young women shared a close bond that extended beyond their school activities. J.B. invited Tracy to a birthday party planned in her honor on the last Saturday before the start of her senior year. The tragic events of that night began when the girls, navigating in J.B.'s Mazda 929, got lost on the way to the party in Headland. Seeking directions in Ozark marked the beginning of an inexplicable and devastating series of events. The night of July 31, 1999 was an evening intended for a celebration as the two teenagers set out in J.B.'s car to attend a field party in Headland in honor of J.B.'s upcoming birthday. Their journey began at 10:05 p.m. as J.B. and Tracy embarked on the route to the neighboring town. Navigating the curvy back roads, they found themselves lost, ultimately ending up in Ozark, 20 miles north of Dothan. At 11:30 p.m., they stopped at a closed Big Little store in Ozark seeking directions. A woman and her daughter provided guidance, and Tracy used the payphone to inform her parents of their situation, expressing confidence that they would be home soon. Sadly, that call would be the last communication from the two girls. Tracy's mother, Carol Roberts, fell asleep only to awaken at 4:45 a.m. to find no sign of the girls. Discovered crammed unceremoniously into the trunk of a car, the lifeless bodies of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Howlet bore witness to the brutality of their execution-style slayings, each felled by a single 9mm gunshot to the head. Police ruled out robbery as a motive given the untouched belongings in the car. The missing car keys bearing the distinctive block-lettered keychain spelling "hard to get" became a significant puzzle piece. The investigation that ensued was marked by intensity and thoroughness, with law enforcement initially grappling with scant leads. The girls, fully clothed and covered in mud, displayed no clear signs of struggle, adding to the mystery surrounding their demise. Weeks later, a pivotal breakthrough emerged when the state lab revealed traces of male DNA on J.B.'s bra, underwear, and skin, a crucial piece of DNA evidence that would later become the linchpin in solving the case. Despite initial leads leading nowhere, a twist occurred a month after the crime was committed. A man named Johnny Barentine came forward with a confession and claimed to have witnessed a black truck speeding away from the crime scene. Barentine lived in close proximity to where the bodies were found, and inconsistencies arose, casting doubt on his confession. A neighbor he implicated had an alibi, and the male DNA found at the crime scene did not match. Barentine soon found himself arrested as the prime suspect. He would later tell a grand jury that he fabricated the entire thing to get the reward money. The case stagnated for 2 decades with various speculations circulating about the perpetrators. In 2018, spurred by the success in capturing the Golden State offender, investigators renewed their efforts. The evidence was submitted to Parabon Nanolabs, leading to the development of a genetic profile and a groundbreaking identification. Ozark Chief of Police Marlos Walker found himself in a pivotal moment when he decided to submit the collected evidence from the crime scene of J.B. Beasley and Tracy Howlet to Parabon Nano Labs, a Virginia-based forensic technology company. The objective was clear: find the suspect responsible for the case that had haunted the community since July 31, 1999. Utilizing advanced genetic analysis, Parabon Nanolabs developed a comprehensive genetic profile and employed the public DNA database GED match to trace family connections leading to a potential suspect. Months later, the breakthrough came. A match was found. The name attached to the DNA profile was none other than 45-year-old Coley McCraney, a revelation that added a layer of complexity to the case. Strikingly, Police Chief Marlos Walker recognized the name from his high school days, a former classmate with whom he had shared the basketball court. On March 17, 2019, the culmination of the investigation led to McCraney's arrest during a routine traffic stop. The shocking twist lay in the fact that, for all appearances, McCraney had led a quiet and unassuming life. A truck driver with a brief military stint and a role as a bishop in a local church, he seemed worlds away from the heinous crimes with which he was charged. The anticipated trial faced its own set of challenges. Originally scheduled for September 2020, the onset of the global pandemic forced a delay. The ensuing months brought additional heartache for the families as the trial scheduled for August 2022 was hindered by a lack of suitable jurors. The setback intensified the emotional burden carried by those seeking justice for JB and Tracy. Finally, on April 17, 2023, at the Dale County Courthouse, the trial commenced. The courtroom witnessed a procession of forensic scientists offering crucial testimony. Among the damning evidence was a revelation from a forensic scientist who confirmed the presence of McCraney's DNA in Beasley's body that was collected in 1999, leaving no room for doubt regarding the perpetrator's guilt. McCraney, who had steadfastly maintained his innocence since his arrest, underwent a surprising transformation during the trial, and in a turn of events he presented a different version of the night's events. He testified that he and J.B. Beasley had arranged to meet at an Ozark gas station at 10 p.m. on July 21, 1999, a claim that contradicted the prosecution's narrative. According to McCraney, Beasley failed to appear at the designated meeting spot, leading him to encounter her and Tracy Howlet later that night when they were lost. Offering assistance, he proposed to guide them back to Highway 231, leading to an unexpected scenario. McCraney's testimony described consensual intercourse between him and Beasley inside his long-haul truck, while Tracy remained in the car. This story stood in stark contrast to the state's allegation, which claimed that McCraney had led the girls into a marshy area where he reportedly assaulted Beasley, threatened them with a 9mm handgun, executed both girls, and then hid their bodies in the car trunk. Despite the divergent accounts, the jury returned a verdict on April 26, 2023, following a short deliberation. Coley McCraney was convicted of every accusation brought against him. A life sentence without the possibility of release resulted from the prompt decision. After hearing his sentence, McCraney was put in handcuffs and led from the courtroom, bringing an end to the protracted tale of Tracy Howlet and J.B. Beasley's terrible deaths. Moving on to the next case. Coy Dan Vu. Coy Dan Vu was last seen at his family's home in Clark County, Washington on April 7, 2007. Family members remember seeing him between midnight and 1 a.m. after his parents put him to bed, but by 8 a.m. the next morning, he was missing. His bed appeared untouched, and he has not been seen or heard from since. Although Coy was 25 at the time, he has the cognitive abilities of a 10-year-old. Deaf since birth, he cannot speak and has very limited skills in American Sign Language, though he may use hand gestures and writing to communicate with others. At the time of his disappearance, he lived with his parents, sister, and brother-in-law. The family were planning a trip to Seattle to celebrate his mother's birthday, which they were due to leave for on April 8th. Coy's family do not believe the 25-year-old left of his own accord because he was looking forward to the upcoming family trip. Furthermore, many of his favorite possessions had been left behind, including his jackets as well as his bicycle, which was his main means of transportation. While he sometimes left home, it was only ever for a few hours at most, and he never went out at night. Additionally, on the night of his disappearance, there was a heavy rainstorm in the area. Initially, authorities believed that Coy had wandered away from home and possibly gotten lost. Later on the day of his disappearance, the police brought in scent dogs to help track the 25-year-old's trail. The canines reacted to a smell just a few miles from the home, but it quickly went dead. Investigators also noted there were no signs of forced entry into the house. On April 8th, a woman watching a news report about Coy called the authorities believing she had seen the missing man earlier that day as he had been playing basketball with her sons at the Ellsworth Elementary School. Notably, Coy was a fan of basketball and enjoyed playing it. The woman recalled that she had given the man a bottle of water, which he had taken and consumed very quickly, but she didn't realize he needed help, as he never indicated he was in trouble, despite being capable of doing so. Following this tip, investigators took their scent dogs to the school, but like before, the trail quickly dropped off. Over the next few days, a massive search took place which utilized law enforcement members on foot as well as trained divers. Detectives also interviewed local sex offenders, but nothing came from their efforts. The more time passed, the more authorities began to suspect that something sinister was afoot. They began to investigate Coy's disappearance as a crime. On April 27th, detectives spoke with a person of interest. However, this individual has never been publicly named and very little information is available on the initial investigation. Investigators now believe the 25-year-old was the victim of foul play and that his body was put in a dumpster and ultimately wound up in a landfill near Boardman, Oregon. Still, there are no suspects in the case as of the writing of this video. It has also been noted that following his disappearance, Coy may have traveled to Oregon, Vancouver, Washington, or elsewhere in Washington state. At this time, it is unknown what evidence there is that indicates why any of these situations are possibilities. Coy is described as an outgoing young man who may approach anyone. He has the ability to purchase goods from a store and order food at a restaurant, often simply by pointing at items on the menu. He frequented the Albertsons grocery store in his neighborhood and may confuse other Albertsons stores in other areas with the one he is accustomed to. 25-year-old Coy was last seen on April 7, 2007, at his family home in Clark County, Washington, sometime between 12 and 1 a.m. He is described as an Asian male who stands at around 5'5" and has brown eyes. At the time he was last seen, Coy had black hair and weighed around 118 pounds. Though he was born in Vietnam, he is an American citizen and does not understand Vietnamese. His right arm and hand are slightly deformed. If still alive, he would be 41 years old today. Anyone with information about Coy's disappearance is urged to contact the Clark County Sheriff's Office at 877-274-6311. Moving on to the next case. Krishana Logan. Krishana Logan, then 19 years old, resided in an apartment on the 24100 block of Robin Hood Avenue in Toledo, Ohio. She was an exotic dancer by trade, but her real goal was to go to college in Texas. Sadly, she would never have the opportunity to pursue her goals. Her body was discovered inside of her apartment on April 15, 2000. She had been choked and beaten. From the crime scene, investigators gathered DNA evidence belonging to an unidentified individual. In relation to the matter, Krishana's boyfriend was taken into custody the next day, April 16th. He was released once the DNA evidence ruled him out as a suspect in the case. Even though DNA testing could rule out individuals, it was not developed sufficiently to identify a culprit, and the investigation was closed. In an effort to finally make progress, investigators recently examined the case and using genetic genealogy. The suspect's DNA profile could be rated. Their DNA was uploaded to public DNA databases since CODIS was unable to find any matches. The Lucas County Prosecutor's Office and the police chief were informed by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation on January 4, 2021, that a match had finally been achieved for the DNA recovered from a crime scene in 2000. The DNA of Kenneth Marshall, a resident of Hammond, Indiana, matched. This DNA not only proved that he is accountable for Krishana's ordeal, but it also connected him to two distinct incidences of sexual assault. On January 15th, Marshall was taken into custody by Hammond police. Following his arrest, he was interviewed by members of the Lucas County Court Case Task Force. After that, on January 25th, he was transported to Ohio and registered at the Lucas County Jail. Marshall showed up for a video arraignment 4 days later on January 29th. His bond was set at $300,000. Starlet Bell, a 60-year-old Texas resident, recalls April 15, 2000 as if it were yesterday. She found out that one of her nieces, Krishana, had passed away when she was working as a nurse in Toledo. While she calls me, my other niece can be heard yelling non-stop. Bell remarked as the name appeared on the screen. At the same moment, I heard on the TV that a young woman's life had been snatched. She was thrilled about a fresh start, moving to Texas and starting college. Thus, her life was cut suddenly at an even worse moment. All of it was snatched from her. Began to assume that Marshall was acquainted with Krishana from her profession as an exotic dancer. From there, I really think he followed her. It wasn't at all random, in my opinion. There were also reports that she was terrified of a man who closely resembled Marshall. I told my sister that he looked like the guy she used to describe when I saw his image. Bell stated that now that Krishana is at peace, it's time for her family to experience the same. They never gave up looking for answers and hoping Marshall would receive a life sentence if found guilty. Moving on to the next case. Laquenta Nichelle Riley. 19-year-old Laquenta Riley disappeared in the winter of 2003. As investigators retraced her steps, they found that she'd been living with a roommate in Eufaula, Alabama, up until Thanksgiving. Planning to move out, Laquenta returned to the apartment on December 5th to gather her belongings. That same day, she called her mother, Pamela, sounding distressed, and asked for a ride to Montgomery. Unfortunately, Pamela couldn't pick her up, leaving Laquenta to find another way there. She moved in with her aunt and cousin in the 1500 block of Hill Street, Montgomery. Laquenta was last seen by family members on December 7, 2003, at around 11:30 p.m. when she left her Hill Street residence. After leaving the home, she entered the passenger seat of a green four-door vehicle which is described as possibly being a Ford Taurus or Chevrolet Caprice. The unidentified driver took the 19-year-old 3 miles to her mother's home. Laquenta's brother was the one to answer the door. He asked her who was driving the car and later told authorities that he didn't recognize the vehicle. Laquenta claimed the driver was a friend she had met in the neighborhood before asking to borrow a jacket. After she got into the car, she was never seen again. 3 days later, Pamela reported her daughter missing. She had left behind her handbag and money. At some point, either a few days or weeks after the disappearance, Laquenta's mother found a message on her answering machine. The audio has never been made public, but it is machine. The audio has never been made public, but it is reportedly unclear. Hamila claimed that her daughter's voice could be heard saying, either "leave me alone" or "let me go home." A man's voice in the background said Laquenta's name, and the call cut off. It has never been interesting. Lead, however, did arise at some point following her disappearance when her name was used on an apartment rental in Stone Mountain, Georgia. The 19-year-old had attended high school in this same city. Pamela traveled to the apartment block and showed one resident a photo of Riley. He claimed she had lived down the hall and recently asked to borrow his phone following an altercation of some kind, but had moved out a few days before Paula's arrival. Unfortunately, though it has been almost 2 decades since Laquenta vanished, there have been no new substantial updates in her case. It seems the authorities are no closer to solving her disappearance than they were back in 2003. Laquenta Riley was 19 when she vanished from Montgomery, Alabama, on December 7, 2003. She was last seen entering a green four-door vehicle, possibly a Ford Taurus or Chevrolet Caprice. Laquenta is described as an African-American woman with brown eyes and standing at 5'8". At the time of her disappearance, she had black hair and weighed around Awash 200. She was also wearing a yellow and green Echo shirt, stonewashed blue jeans, green and yellow Reebok trainers, and a silver chain bracelet. Laquenta has pierced ears and a pierced tongue as well as a scar on her nose. She also has 2 tattoos, R.I.P. Misha tattooed on one bicep and Laquenta on the other bicep. She may use the nicknames Quana and Quana. If she is alive, she will be 38 years old. If you have any information regarding Laquenta's disappearance, please contact Central Alabama Crime Stoppers at 334-215-7867 or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 800-843-5678. Moving on to the next case. Leah Hickman. Leah Hickman, a 21-year-old broadcast journalism student at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, had big dreams of becoming a TV news reporter. At the time she went missing, she was living with her half-sister, 25-year-old Jessica Vickers, in an apartment on 8th Avenue. Leah had previously attended Ohio Valley Christian School before graduating from Christ Academy in Point Pleasant. She was fondly thought of by those who knew her, and she enjoyed TV shows such as Friends and Arrested Development, as well as spending time with her loved ones. Leah was last seen on December 14, 2007, by her half-sister. That evening, Leah signed into her MySpace page, then called a friend to say she was going to McDonald's. The receipt for this was later found in her home. Jessica Vickers last spoke to Leah that night when the 21-year-old had been washing dishes and told Jessica about her new university schedule and the grades she'd received for the semester. It seemed that Leah was extremely happy with her life and with how school was going. The next day, on December 15th, Jessica came home to find that Leah's keys, purse, and car were there, but the student herself wasn't. Her employer of 5 months, Dress Barn, reported that she had not turned up for work that day, something which was highly unlike her. With nobody able to reach her, the family began to worry. Ron Hickman, Leah's father, was hit especially hard by the disappearance of his daughter. Ron resided an hour away in Point Pleasant, but drove through with his sister and a preacher to search Leah's home. Leah was Ron's only child, and the pair were extremely close. On Monday, December 16, 2007, a missing persons report was filed with the Huntington Police Department. Law enforcement and search parties canvassed the area, while Dress Barn put up a $10,000 reward for any information that led to Leah's whereabouts. A week later, on December 21st, just days before Christmas, Leah's body was found stuffed in the crawl space under her apartment building, her body wrapped in plastic. It was determined that she had been murdered having died from strangulation. The apartment complex's crawl space could be accessed through the communal laundry room and via each of the 4 units in the building. 2 of the units in the apartment were unoccupied, with Leah and her sister residing in the 3rd. The 4th unit was occupied by a man who had a solid alibi confirming that he was out of town when Leah was killed. Early on, police had a suspect in the case, someone who was not publicly named. They stated they were trying to gather evidence so they could build a case against this unidentified person, believing this was not a random act of violence but was carried out by someone familiar with the apartment block and Leah herself. Tips about Leah's murder flooded into the Huntington Police Departments. Friends and family hung flyers around the city appealing for information. The weekend before Christmas, Dress Barn closed its doors, hanging a sign that said they had closed out of respect for their former employee. They also covered the costs of Leah's funeral. Trace evidence found at the scene was sent to Phoenix, Arizona for DNA testing in 2008, and in 2009, the results came back, but they yielded no answers. Around this time, police said they still had some evidence and planned to use it when technology advanced further, hoping that one day it would lead to answers for Leah's family. Over the years, many members of the police department have assured the public and the family of Leah that her case is not cold and has not been closed, but it seems clear that progress has slowed considerably. Many online sleuths have criticized the investigation and expressed dissatisfaction with the police work showcased by Huntington PD. There is much speculation both online and among the local community that Jessica's ex-boyfriend was responsible for the murder, as he blamed Leah for the fact that Jessica had broken up with him. Allegedly, he and Leah had never got on. There are also many rumors floating around about Jessica helping this man to cover up the crime, and that the plastic wrapped around Leah was from either Jessica's work or the ex-boyfriend's work. None of these postulations has any evidence to back them, however, and appear to be simple speculation. For the years after her murder, Leah's father continued to meet up with Lieutenant John Williams once a month for updates on the case. Although Williams has since retired, he and Ron continued to stay in touch. In a 2019 article, Ron Hickman shared how his daughter had made a lasting impact on those around her. He mentioned that even years later, people still approach him to talk about how helpful Leah had been during her life. In an interview with NBC News, he said, "She left such an impression on people in such a short amount of time. Imagine if she had gotten to live her whole life." Despite the ongoing police investigation, the murder of Leah Hickman remains unsolved. Moving on to the next case. Lillian DeClo. In 1994, Lillian DeClo, then 89 years old, resided in Broward County, Florida. Among her health issues was memory loss. June Nicholas, Lillian's niece, took care of her. June went into her aunt's house late on April 29, 1994, in the afternoon. She looked into the first bedroom, which Lillian usually used for naps, usually allowed her to nap. When June got to the end of the hall, she turned to gaze right and saw Lillian's body lying on the ground. They'd beaten and strangled her. Investigators discovered that the perpetrator most likely came in through a bedroom window. They thought Lillian was not the intended victim when they discovered the house had been looted. Rather, they thought it was an attempted theft. From the crime site, investigators gathered a number of objects in the hopes that they may come in handy later. When Lillian's nightgown was retested in 2004, the Broward County Sheriff's Office discovered that male DNA was present. In an effort to learn more about the former teacher and nurse, the Broward County Sheriff's Office's cold case section revived her case in 2019, utilizing DNA databases and historical case files. They eventually met Johnny Mac Brown as a result of their activities. He used to reside a few houses away from Lillian and is a former U.S. Marine. His relatives informed detectives that he had been homeless for a number of years and suffered from PTSD and drug addiction. In 2010, he passed away from natural causes. Detectives were given permission by a judge in August of 2022 to remove Brown's body from the South Florida National Cemetery in Palm Beach County. According to tests conducted by the crime lab of the Broward County Sheriff's Office, Brown's DNA matched that of Lillian's nightgown. The Sheriff's Office stated that there was a 66.8 trillion times greater chance that the DNA findings originated from Brown than if they came from someone else. The Broward State Attorney's Office believes the case is closed after accepting the conclusion that Johnny Mac Brown caused Lillian's injuries. Following the announcement of the identification in 2023, June Nicholas said this, "I know she can sleep soundly wherever she is. That this is closed pleases us. We are free to proceed. We know that the matter was not left unsolved, so we may leave in peace." June also remembered her experience upon finding Lillian's body. "I gave Auntie a call, how are you doing? I looked in the first bedroom where she usually slept for naps. At last, I descended to the end of the hall and turned to see her lying on the floor to my right. According to Nicholas, she was greatly impacted by the brutality against her aunt. To cope, I took a full year off from work. I was unable to handle it, so I let someone watch my kids for a few months. It really was that awful. She would be on the floor when I would be lying in bed. Moving on to the next case. Michael Johnston. Michael Johnston was a father of 2 who was married. At the age of 25, Rochelle Robinson, a 19-year-old fast food employee and student pursuing a teaching degree, tempted him, delaying his plans for the future. They had played the fantasy card game Magic: The Gathering together on June 27, 1994, but only 6 hours later, they would experience a terrifying reality from which they would not escape. According to police, the murderer caught the reclusive couple having sex when they pulled over to the side of the road. The Tacoma Sportsman's Club discovered Michael's body the morning of June 27, 1994, behind his automobile on a peaceful road. Michael sustained a gunshot wound to his throat. His secret girlfriend was discovered dead 5 miles from the car, having been fatally injured with the knife alone. There are marks on her neck that indicate she was led to the scene of her death at knife point. She was discovered oddly with the male victim's clothing inside out. A cardboard box that had formerly held copy paper of the highest caliber and would hold the key to the investigation, or lack thereof, was partially covering her body. Police investigated every part of the box because they thought the killer had either received it from someone or had owned it for years. Nevertheless, their investigation has not resulted in any arrests. Rochelle's acquaintance reported to the police that she had been complaining to them about being stalked by an unfamiliar male. This man had visited her place of employment several times, and she finally consented to go on a date with him after much charming but persistent bribery. To her dismay, he pursued her despite the fact that they did not match since he was reluctant to give up. He would visit her place of employment and just look at her in silence. This individual was reported to be white, between the ages of 25 and 30, 5 feet 10 inches, 170, with brown-colored hair and pimples. He might have been employed for a glass firm because of his slouched gait. However, no man fitting that description was discovered. The substantial life insurance policy that Michael and his real wife had taken out on one another made others leery. His demise had a pecuniary benefit that could not be overlooked. But because there was little evidence, his wife Jane passed the polygraph and was exonerated by the police. The murderer is still at large and has not been found to have a clear motivation beyond the thoughts of a jealous lover. A hired clairvoyant named Nancy Meyer and a private detective named Jim Wright had different thoughts than the police, who thought the murderer was an axe lover or someone in their close, intimate circle. Since their magic game dealt with witchcraft and occult matters, they reasoned that the killings had something to do with it. They deduced that the murder was ritualistic in nature and that 2 young disciples and a professor were somehow involved. The police did not go into these claims because there was no evidence to support them. Moving on to the next case. Mr. X, a farmer in the Johnson County town of Claiborne, found a man's body in a forested part of his land early on December 11, 1972. The victim had been shot twice with a .25 caliber handgun referred to as a Saturday Night Special, a colloquial name for a cheap, lightweight, subpar firearm. Additionally, investigators claimed that the weapon was useless at a distance. It was found that the man's chest wound was the cause of his death. He had nothing to wear or possessions. Not at the site, not on his person. Even though the man's fingerprints were collected, they did not contain his name that law police could use. He was therefore called Mr. X. Mr. X is characterized as a white or Hispanic man with short, wavy brown hair who was initially estimated to be between the ages of 30 and 50. He was around 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 110. When he was found, he had been deceased for no more than a week. From the beginning, the inquiry into Mr. X's death was challenging. Some pieces of him have never been retrieved because scavenger animals had seriously degraded his remains. In addition, the absence of expended casings from the crime site suggested to the detectives that the young man might have been killed somewhere else. A reporter claimed to have encountered a man in the 1990s who explained that drug traffickers acting out of revenge were responsible for the crime. However, there aren't many specifics on this theory at this time. Not much was accomplished in the Mr. X case in the 1970s or the years that followed. Consequently, he was interred in a pauper's grave at Texas Rose Hill Cemetery without using his own name. The case stayed unsolved until the Johnson County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit looked into it in 2012. The remains of Mr. X were excavated in August 2013 in order to gather DNA and do more study. It was found that the young man was far younger than initially believed throughout this procedure. He was more like 16 to 24 years old, not 30 to 50. Around this same period, detectives proposed that he had been found in a, quote, compromising circumstance and had not been undressed after his death. According to a 2014 paper that was published in the Claiborne Time Review, researchers were utilizing two possibilities. The first stated that in a pub in Fort Worth, Mr. X got into a brawl with two males. Even though Mr. X shot both men, none of them died, so they made the decision to exact retribution. According to Jason Ferguson, a cold case squad investigator at the time, Johnson County used to be a sort of dump for bodies from Tarrant and occasionally Dallas counties. According to a different story, Mr. X was making out with his boss's wife while working on a ranch in the county. He was advised to stop, but he persisted, which resulted to his death. Ferguson claims, however, that a large number of those who they believe could verify or refute these theories are no longer alive. Over the years, it has proven challenging to recreate Mr. X's face. His mandible was never discovered, therefore his skull is incomplete, and his post-mortem photos are incredibly blurry. His remains have likewise crumbled with time, with the cranium being the most affected. Nevertheless, in October 2020, Carl Kopelman, who has often created reconstruction images of Mr. X's appearance before to his passing, made this assessment. In an attempt to ascertain Mr. X's real identity, the DNA Doe Project got involved in the case in 2019. Their website states that it is pending right now. The case of Mr. X remains unresolved. You can call the Johnson County Sheriff's Office at 817-556-6058 if you know anything about it. Moving on to the next case. The Whitehall Mystery. One of the most baffling and unusual cases of the 19th century, the Whitehall Mystery began on September 11, 1888, when a right arm and shoulder were discovered on the muddy shore of the River Thames. Initially, it was believed that the arm had been discarded in the water as part of a prank by a medical student. However, in the following months, it became evident that something far more sinister was unfolding in London. Known as the Whitehall Mystery, the discovery of dismembered pieces of a woman's body scattered throughout the city horrified the British public in the late 1800s. It is now connected with the Thames Torso murders and, like those remains, unsolved. On October 2nd, less than a month after the arm was found on the banks of the River Thames, another body part was found. Men working on the construction of Scotland Yard found a parcel that contained carefully wrapped in cloth, possibly a black petticoat and neatly tied with string. Despite the effort put into packaging up the torso, it was clear that whoever had dismembered the body was not skilled in doing so. The body appeared healthy and well-nourished and was matched by a police surgeon to the arm found the previous month. It was believed that the torso had been placed there after September 29th, as that was the most recent day that workers had been there in the cellar. The discovery of the arm, followed so closely by the finding of the torso, led to the brewing of panic among the locals and fears that the killer would never be caught. 2 weeks later, on October 17th, a reporter utilizing a trained dog and acquiring the help of a laborer found a left leg which had been cut above the knee and buried near the construction site. The remaining limbs in the victim's head have never been located, even though it's been over a century since her remains were first discovered. She has also never been identified in the years since. In the aftermath of these grisly discoveries, police ruled out any connection between the dismembered Jane Doe and the serial killer, Jack the Ripper. Westminster's coroner initiated the inquest into Jane Doe's case. She was found to be, quotes, of large stature and well-nourished and approximately 24 years of age. It was noted that her uterus had been removed and that her right arm had been removed by someone with anatomical knowledge post-mortem. The victim had been wearing a branch satin dress at the time of her death. This specific piece of clothing had been manufactured in Bradford and the pattern was 3 years old. Some newspaper pieces found within the torso came from the Echo dated August 24th and from the Chronicle, although the date of this particular paper is unknown. Jane Doe's cause of death could not be established, although she is believed to have not suffocated or drowned. She's estimated to have been dead for around 6 weeks to 2 months. She appeared to have been a relatively healthy individual, and there was no indication that she had given birth in her short lifetime. Jane Doe is described as a fair-skinned individual with dark hair and as someone who is not used to manual labor. There have been a few possible identities for Jane, though none that we can state with any degree of certainty. She was initially thought to have been a young married woman who left her Lewisham home on August 20th, 1888. The unnamed woman was 23 years old and tall, and had threatened to take her own life. It is believed that this woman did commit suicide and is likely not Jane Doe. Another theory is that Jane Doe may have been a woman named Emma Potter. In September of 1888, Emma's mother came forward, fearing that the body could belong to her 17-year-old daughter, who was described as having a weak intellect. Emma had left home one day and simply never returned. The police surgeon confirmed that the details the mother provided about Emma matched those of Jane Doe's arm, but this lead has never been conclusively proven or disproven. In one of the most gruesome cold cases of the 1800s, both Jane Doe and her killer remain unidentified. Moving on to the next case. Valerie Ames. 31-year-old Valerie Ames was a vibrant and devoted mother. She loved being a mother to her 2 young girls, ages 5 and 9, according to others around her. People who knew her well said she enjoyed being with them and seeing them develop. She also loved animals, particularly horses, very much. She always looked forward to going horseback riding, particularly when she traveled to Texas. Another pastime she loved was dancing. People who knew her well said that she still valued her ballet dancing from her younger years. A woman went to her jailed father's apartment on August 10, 1996, to make sure the doors were still locked and to see how things were going. When she arrived at the flat, the front door was unlocked. Upon entering the flat, she was met with a macabre sight. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of an unknown woman. Later on, Valerie Ames was recognized as the body. The autopsy revealed that she had been killed by beating and stabbing. Valerie's 2 daughters were visiting their grandma in England at the time of her death. A phone call alerting them to Valerie's passing was received. When Valerie's mother discovered that Valerie's body had not been recovered in her apartment, she was taken aback. Her body was discovered in the Riverside neighborhood of Jacksonville, at the Courtyard Apartments, 1606 King Street. Valerie did not possess a car, although she worked and lived in Arlington. Nobody knew how she got to the Riverside area, or why her friends and family didn't remember taking her to that part of town on the day she was killed. One day, earlier than Valerie's death was discovered, the apartment's occupant and his girlfriend were taken into custody. The flat had been left unlocked after the couple was taken into custody. The resident denied knowing Valerie when questioned. They did not know her personally, but they said in the police report that she had a somewhat familiar appearance. The timing disqualified the couple as murder suspects. Never was the murder weapon found. Police were informed by family members about a particular occurrence they thought might be related to the murder. They told detectives that Valerie had called in to report an assault by a police officer 3 months before she passed away. She never did, however, submit the report, and no charges were ever brought. When she was killed, the officer was reportedly cleared after a subsequent investigation. Later, Valerie's eldest daughter told police that someone had called and given them information about Valerie's murder. The woman promised to work with the police to reach an agreement. Later, this woman's body was discovered. It's unclear from the accounts, though, how she passed away. The loss of Valerie had a profound impact on her mother and 2 daughters. They moved out of Jacksonville a few months after the horrific event because the grandmother was so distraught and anxious. The investigation finally became cold because no suspects were found despite interviewing people and following up on leads. But in 2008, the case would be resurrected with the promise of improved technology. Ultimately, on August 2, 2024, Sheriff T.K. Waters declared at a press conference that Jerry Phillips, then 69 years old, had been taken into custody and was being charged with second-degree murder and sexual battery in relation to Valerie Ames's death. Waters wouldn't elaborate on what caused it because the legal process is still in progress, but she did add that technological improvements and excellent information helped focus the search on a single individual. The murder was not an isolated incident, the sheriff added. He would not, however, elaborate on how Phillips and Valerie came to know one another. Despite not having an indictment, Phillips was taken into custody in North Carolina. Michelle James, one of Valerie's kids, told the media that the girls had been living without their mother for 10,098 days. Valerie was not present for birthdays, weddings, graduations, holidays, or the birth of her 6 grandchildren. She claims that the years haven't done anything to ease the sorrow of her non-existence. Now that we are here, over 28 years later, with some answers regarding our lovely mother Valerie, she has finally been given the opportunity to receive justice. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.